everybody, it's Stephen here for Bland Designs and Idiot Quilter, and I'm going to do something that I don't do very often, and that is put up a tutorial about how to do one of the tiled wall hanging scenes that come from, well, this particular one comes from Sweetpea, I believe. It is an in the hoop design, as I've told you. It's in the hoop applique, and I'm not going to take you through the process of actually creating the individual tiles, and here's what I'm talking about, this right here. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to show you, after you've got all the tiles made, how to put the whole thing together, because there are a few tips and tricks I want to share with you, and this is a part of the project that probably scares many people. So I've put together a series of videos here for you to see the process, and yeah, I hope this helps you out if you've never done one of these before, or if you have done one of these before. I hope my tips and tricks help you out, and I'd be interested in hearing your tips and tricks too, so you can put those down in the comments below. So I've been working on a Halloween in the hoop embroidery project. This is a wall hanging, and as you can see, it's made up of a number of different blocks or tiles. And I have just finished stitching out the last tile, and I have it here on my cutting table, and what I need to do is trim it up. I have to get rid of some of the stabilizer and make it into the same square as the rest of these, and then I'm going to assemble it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my camera down so you can see what I have on my cutting table. Let's move this out of the way. And what I have to do now is cut away this stabilizer. This I use usually in a wall hanging. You can either use a tearaway stabilizer, or this one is a cutaway, which is called no-show mesh. Either one will work. Just one word of caution: if you're using no-show mesh, do not use steam if you press your blocks, because it will shrink and your whole block will crumble up into a little ball. Ask me how I know. Okay, and then I need to trim it up so that it's the same size as the ones you just saw on my board. Now I have a really handy tool for this, and this is called Trimmer by George 2.0. I believe now, sorry about the glare, there is a 3.0, and it comes from the Hoop Sisters, but you may be able to find it in your local quilt shop. But short of that, you might get it on Amazon, or you can go right to their website and get it. If you live in the United States, not a big deal. If you live here in Canada, you're going to be paying shipping. And of course, the exchange rate is going to make this more expensive. I think I got this at my local quilt store, and I think at the time it was $30 Canadian. But it was well worth every cent, and I'll show you why. The way this ruler is designed, well, it looks like an ordinary ruler. It's got markings on it, but it has this little thing on the bottom, and it's a lip. And I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up. You see this white strip? I'm trying to keep the glare off as much as I can. There's a lip right here. This is a piece of aluminum, and what you do is you use it to lever under your fabric right up against the seam line. And so what it does is it protects your fabric while you cut away your stabilizer. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to go all the way around on all sides of this piece, getting that little lip right up against the stitch line, making sure my fabric is pulled back out of the way. I do not want to cut that yet. And so you can see, now you could do this with a regular ruler, but you've got to be a little bit more aware of where your fabric is when you do that, or you'll cut your fabric, and you don't want to cut your fabric yet. So this is why I say this little tool is great. Now, I cut that. Did I cut that? Yeah, I've cut everything off. Okay, so now I'm going to trim a 1/2 inch to a 1/2 inch. So there is a line which happens when you do these things in your embroidery machine. There is a border line all the way around. So I just take it. Now this is going to be hard for you to see. I know that. And I'm going to find my 1/2 inch mark, just like I would on any other ruler. Again, at this point, you could just use a regular ruler for this, but this is a 2-for-1. And trim that off. And I'm just going to go around all 4 sides, lining the ruler up on the 1/2 inch mark along that bordering line or boundary line, whatever you want to call it. And you're probably saying, well, your colors are all kind of like weird on the edges. Yes, they are. Don't worry about that. This is giving us a little bit of fabric when we go to sew these together, which I'm going to show you. Gives you a little bit of, fabric you can attach here to make your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oops, almost did that wrong. I put it on the 1/4 inch seam. If that had happened, it's not the end of the world. But usually in these patterns, they recommend a 1/2 inch. Just gives you some playroom. And there we go. We have the block all squared up. So now, and if I just get my scraps here out of the way and I pull my camera up, okay. So this piece, let me grab a pin, goes here. It's the last block. And I like to pin them all up in the order that they should go in the finished product on my design board so I can get an overall sense of the finished design. Okay, so there is what this is going to look like, minus borders. I will be putting borders on this, and I'll talk more about that later on. But now, what I have to do is I have to sew each row just like you would if this was patchwork. And I'm going to show you how you line them up, though, because there's some tricky little pieces here. Like you have a satin stitch here that has to be joined up. So how do you do that? Well, that's what I'm going to show you. So I have my first 2 blocks laid out here on my wool cutting mat. And I'm purposely putting it on the wool cutting mat because the way I'm going to line these up, this wool cutting mat's going to act like a giant pin cushion. Now, you don't have to have a wool cutting mat, or a wool pressing mat is what I meant. You do not have to have a wool pressing mat to do this, but I just find this is the easiest way. It's a method that works for me. Now, remember we talked about this outside line, and I don't know if you can see it, but I had stitched that during the process of making each block in a white thread, and I did that consciously so I would see the line. Because this line is going to become very important to us in lining up the pieces. However, in some cases on some of the blocks, I forgot to do it in white. I did it in black, which is going to make it a little bit more difficult, but still manageable. Okay, I need a couple of straight pins to start with. And what I'm going to do is, just put those over to the side, is I'm going to put these 2 pieces, this is block 1 and block 2 in row 1. I'm going to put them together, right sides together. Now there's a whole lot of business going on the back of this, as you can see. So what I want to do is I take a straight pin and I want to find the corner of the line that's the furthest out from the center of the block. In other words, the very outside stitch line. You will find there are 2 stitch lines in here, because one held down the batting and then the other one was the main stitch line for holding down fabric pieces. We want to put our pin into the corner of that outside stitch line, and I know this may be very difficult for you to see, and maybe I can get you in a little closer. Just bear with me. Oops, that wasn't what I want to do, but that's okay. Okay, let's see. Just moving this camera down best I can. I think that's as close to it as I can get to you. So you see I'm taking this pin and I'm putting it right in the corner of that outside stitch line. And then I'm going to find the corner of the stitch line that's on the right side of my fabric. Now if you look under here, you notice I'm in the corner of the stitch line on the right side of this top piece. So I'm just going to put this in. This is a placeholder. And I'm going to do the same thing on the far side. And sorry if my hand's in the way, but there's no getting around that. Same thing. And get those pins so they're straight as can be. Now, this is lined up pretty good. But what I want to do, because I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine in a second, is I want to put some clips. And I had to grab some clips. So I'm going to secure this with some clips. You could secure it with pins. I prefer clips. whatever works for you. And I'm going to make sure this is not going to go anywhere. Now, I could, if I want to be a little bit more secure, I could put a pin right in here to line the center of the outside line up. I find I don't usually have to do that, but sometimes I do. Now, this is a fairly easy piece, except for, you can see here, there's a satin stitch right here. And that satin stitch has to match up as best I can with the satin stitch down on this side. So how do you do that? Using your pins again. I'm going to put a pin on that line, the line that we were matching up the corners with. I'm going to put a pin right beside the satin stitch on this side, on one side of it, and I'm going to line that up. I'm just going to turn this around so you can see better. I can take these ones out now because I've got it clipped. So there's my satin stitch. I'm going to put a pin right on the outside stitch line, right up close to the satin stitch. Peel this back a bit, and I'm going to place the pin right beside the satin stitch on the bottom piece. Okay. And if I want, I could put a pin in down in this corner to match it up with that corner, just to keep everything straight. Now, is this going to be exact when I stitch it? I'm hoping, but sometimes it doesn't. So if it's really close, that's probably good enough. It's up to you. You just have to see how it's going to look. So you're kind of blind sewing here to a certain extent. Okay, I am all secure. I'd like to put another, I can take those out. I'm going to put one over on this side just for extra security. And I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch down this side because this has to open up this way. So let me move you over to the sewing machine. So first of all, I have found that if I use an invisible thread in my sewing machine, it really helps, especially if you kind of go outside of the lines. You'll understand what that means in a moment. It's just more forgiving. You don't have to use invisible thread. If you're a really accurate sewer, you use the thread of your choice. But you have a lot of colors out here, and that's another reason for using the invisible thread. You don't have to keep changing your bobbin. You don't have to worry about the bobbin so much because nobody's going to see the back, but the top thread anyway. You don't have to keep switching out colors. You can do that if you want to, but you want to know something? I don't think it's going to make much difference in the overall appearance of the final product. I have my HP foot in here. I use a Janome machine, and this is the special plate and foot for what I use for all my 1/4 inch seam allowances. But I'm using it with this as well because I want to line up the inside of this foot. I don't think you can see that. Let me get that. The inside of this, the foot of this, right up against the inside stitched line that's on the back of this. We were lining up with the outside stitch line to line our pieces. Now we're going to be sewing just to the left of that inside line. And what that will do is bury these border stitches. You don't want to see those in the final product in the seam allowance. So I'm going to put this under, and I'm eyeballing it at the moment. I'm just going to drop my needle, not in the fabric at the moment, and I'm looking for that edge of that foot right in here, and I'm eyeballing it because I don't have a line. Now you could take a pencil and draw a line, an extended line from this seam allowance, but I find you can eyeball it pretty good. And I'm just going to stitch. And I'm watching it very carefully, and you don't want to go too fast because you want to keep this as straight as possible. And you notice where I put my clips, I don't really have to take them out because I have them far enough away from this line that they don't really get in my way. If they do, I will take them out. And I'm going to stitch right off the block. Okay. The big reveal. We're going to see how close I got. Now, be prepared that sometimes it's just the nature of the beast. It has nothing really to do with your sewing. It has everything to do with the fact that fabric shrinks when you're embroidering it. You've got bulk in here. We're going for as close as we can. It may not be perfect. So I'm going to open it up and I'm going to take a look. Well, can't get any better than this. Let me put you up here a little bit so you can see this better. I hope you can see. So let me get my stiletto. Okay, here's the join, the seam. And remember the outside borders right here, this white line, that they're lining up perfectly. The same with at the bottom. But what's even more important is my satin stitch from the first block that is connected up to the second block is one continuous. It is right on. I did this really well. That doesn't always happen. So again, and maybe you see this later on, or I'll point it out to you if I don't get it matched up. And what I do for that, basically I take the stitches out and I shift everything again using my pins and my clips, and I go for it again. But I'm very, very happy with the way this piece is joined up. So I'm going to do this now with the next piece. It's the same procedure. I'm going to line up my corners when the third block is face down, wrong side down on top of the second block, and I have a satin stitch line here that continues into that block, so I'm going to line that up by putting a pin in on either side of that satin stitch. And when the corner, I'm going to clip it all. I'm going to sew it just like you saw, and we'll see how that turns out. Okay, so I have my first row sewn together, and my second piece I did came out really good. So I'm very happy with the way this is lining up at the moment. Now I need to do a little bit of pressing. Now, remember I told you, do not use steam if you're using no-show mesh, because it will shrink and you will ruin your block. And in fact, I have a tendency on my iron to hit the steam button automatically because I use it a lot. And I've turned off the steam feature of my iron right now, so I won't do that because it's just a bad habit. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to very lightly press over that seam like you would if you were doing patchwork. But then I'm going to turn it over. These are very bulky seams, as you can see. So what we want to do is we want to press them open. Now, this is a little tricky because you have all these other little pieces of fabric that don't necessarily join up together. They're secure on the other side, but here they're just kind of in the way. So what you're going to do is press these. Now, again, if you've used something like a tearaway stabilizer, you could use your steam at this point. But since I used no-show mesh, and I don't know why I did, because essentially no-show mesh is something you put in like a garment because it's softer, or something that's going to get washed like a quilt. But in this case, this is never going to see a washing machine because it's a wall hanging. So I could have just used tearaway. I don't know why I didn't. I should have. I mean, it's okay. It's not going to give me too much grief. It's just I have to keep in mind, do not use steam. You see my steam buttons right here on the side of my iron. I don't know if you can see that. And I'm so tempted to hit it because it's an impulse. So how flat? Well, you want to get them as flat as you can, but they're not going to be perfect. This stuff's stiff. Several layers of fabric here. There's stabilizer. There's a little bit of stabilizer in this still. And of course, there is batting. So, yeah, get them as flat as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay because we're going to be putting another layer of batting on this. And when we get to it, I'll explain what that's all about. Okay, that's about as good as I can get it. So, I have row 1 stitched. together. I'm going to go and do the rest of the rows, and then I'm going to show you how to join the rows, how to line the rows up together in this process. Okay, I want to show you something that just happened. I'm working on the second row, and I'm putting block 1 and block 2 of the second row together, and I did it the same method as I showed you a moment ago, but I didn't get things lined up very well. And I don't know if you can see this, but if you look, the roof, this part of the tree branch did not line up. And the reason was I forgot to put in my pins to secure that. This got shifted slightly. I could live with that if that was the only problem here. But then again, the same thing happened here. And the basic thing is, I cannot live with this. This looks horrible. Okay, the window's all out of shape, the whole bit. So I'm going to rip this out, and I'm going to show you a fast way to do this, and I'm going to realign it, keeping in mind that make sure I line each one of the satin stitch pieces up to keep it secure. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to take my seam ripper, and I'm just going to get the seam started here. Hope this is in camera shot. Yeah. And I'm just going to go under here and rip out a couple of the stitches to start with. There we go. That's enough. I'm going to take a pin. I'm going to put it into the bottom block, just to anchor it. This is why the wool pressing mat's a great idea. I'm going to use this little shaver. Now, you've seen me use this before. I love it. It's one of my favorite tools. You can get them really inexpensively at dollar stores. You may have to hunt for them. I bought this one for $4. You can buy them on Amazon. It's just a hair trimmer. But they're going to cost you upwards of 15 Canadian dollars or more. You can buy them at certain quilt stores. They're going to charge you, because it says it's a quilt store, they're going to charge you about $25 to $30 for one of these. Go to the dollar store. And they're battery powered, and this is great for ripping out long seams. And the beauty of this is the teeth are so small, it will not cut your fabric, but it cuts very nicely through the thread. So you just pull it back, and that's why I anchored it with the pin here, just to keep it stable. And in no time, you've got it all ripped out. Isn't that great? Okay, so I'm going to have to realign these again. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to do my corners first at the top of the piece with my pins. Okay, that's secured. I'm going to use my clips. Where are my clips? There. In a project like this, you cannot overpin and you cannot overclip. The more, the better, the more secure things are. I'm going to take those two pins out. I'm going to turn this, because this is the side I want to sew on. And now I'm going to find the satin stitch on the bottom piece and line it up with the one on the top. So I'm going to that outside stitch line. I'm putting the pin right next to the stitch, to the satin stitch on the top piece. I'm going to put the pin right next to the satin stitch, right on the line. I'm going to do the same with the next satin stitch. I know this is very awkward for you to see because my hands are in the way. I'm sorry about that, but can't do a lot about that. So this is fiddly work. Take your time with it. Lined up. And then you might want to sort of pull your pins around a little bit. I'm going to put a clip right there in that spot to secure it. Maybe another one. And I'm going to go to the next set, or the next line, and that's right here. Get my pin lined up into that. Pull it up, see where it should go. Right there. Secure that. Go to the next set. Now this is where I went wrong last time, because all I did was I just lined up this one satin line, and that wasn't enough. Put in the clip. Go to the next satin stitch, which is a smaller one right here. And there's another one right beside that that I think should be lined up too. The more the better. Let's clip that. Yes, this can be a little tedious, but the end result is well worth it. I mean, if you put in all these hours, and these things do take hours to stitch out, days actually, um, then it's worth taking a little bit more time just to make sure everything gets lined up. Okay, and we'll do the corner. Okay, I am well lined up and clipped, and I'm just going to throw a couple of clips down on this bottom part again, just to keep everything nice and snug. Take out these, take it over to my sewing machine and stitch like I did before. And I'll show you, hopefully this time my result will be better. So how did I do this time? Much better. Not absolutely perfect, much better. Now I haven't pressed this yet. I'm just stretching it out here a little bit, but you can see that for the most part, my roof part is lined up. This part of the fence is lined up. The window frame is lined up in the sill. And the only one that's a little off, and this just has to do with the stitching, is maybe the tree branch right here, but it is very, very close. It's within 1/16 of an inch. And as far as I'm concerned, that's close enough. Okay, so that worked out. So now I'm going to put the next block on, do the same thing as I just showed you, and then I'm going to press my seams open, not using steam, and then I'm going to show you how to join row 1 to row 2. So now I'm going to show you how to join the rows together. So I've got row 1 and row 2. Now normally I would do all of my rows across first and then attach them together, but I'm going to show you at this point how you would put one row onto the next. And it's very much the same as the last time. So you're just going to flip it to put right sides together. And now you have seams to align as well. So this does get a little bit more involved, but it is not difficult. One thing I forgot to mention to you, if you want to make your seams really flat, which these aren't really doing so well, I use acorn pressing solution in the pen, and you put a little bit down the seam in here and then press it, especially when you're not using steam. This really does help. They are not going to lay perfectly flat, no matter what you do. But that's okay, just as long as you're like this. Okay, let's get it lined up. We're going to start with, and it doesn't really matter where you start, but the tricky part is lining up your seam lines so with this fold. So I do have an outside one. I want to line it up so I can find that in the seam, and I'm going to go to that line just like I did with the corners, same thing. And in the case of this piece, I have 2 seams, straighten it out. I'm going to do it in the corners as well. Now you may have fabric hanging over the edges, and that is okay. That is going to happen because we're going to be doing a trimming of this because we're going to add a border as well. So don't worry about that. What you're trying to really do is get it lined up as best you can. So I'm going to take another pin, and I've got a satin stitch here that I want to line up. So using the same procedure as I did before. Line that up with its counterpart on the other piece. Tricky, tricky, because I'm working here with a pin already in the corner. And it's difficult to see, especially when you got a camera here. So I'm sorry, I know you can't really see what I'm doing because I can't really see what I'm doing. Okay, that looks good. Get that in there. Let's put in another clip. And let's take that one out. Let's line up this. And take another pin. And here's another piece right here. So you're just going to go down all the way down. There's another one right here. Don't want to miss any of them. I know you're going to be tempted to skip. Don't, because this is the best way I have found for keeping things all lined up. Now, as I said, don't worry if you have the fabric on the edges is not lining up. It'll be close. What's more important is to get these little satin stitches pieces lined up with their counterpart on the bottom piece. I hope I'm making sense. Very difficult to see. And you can see this can be a time-consuming process. But if you didn't line things up this way, you'd be sewing absolutely blind, and you might get some of the things to line up, but many of them would not line up. And that could cause you a lot of grief. So let's get this one. We're almost there. And there is a little bit of coaxing things to line up. Am I getting thrown off here? I think I'm okay. This does take some concentration, so, lock your sewing room door. So nobody comes in and disturbs you. This one's really hard to see because it's black on black. I'm almost there. Wow. This is really hard to see. Okay. Sometimes I've been going on the inside, sometimes you have to go on the outside of the satin stitch line because you just can't see it. Okay, we're almost there. And the corner. Okay. All right, we can take these out. And I want a few more clips down on the side here, just for extra security. Because I hate, oops, dropped a clip. I hate getting it all sewn, especially on these longer seams, and having to come back and rip it all out. And I'm just putting a few down on the other side. Like I said, you can't have too many pins or clips. Okay, I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew it just the same way, just inside the inside stitch line, just by a hair, and hopefully everything will come out. So I'll come back and show you what the end result is. Okay, so all my tiles are together and they lined up pretty well. There's a couple of spots where they're a little, not quite, they're out by maybe a 1/16 of an inch, but when you've got it all together, you really don't notice those when you're looking at it. I could point them out to you, but I'm not going to point them out to you. And that's the decision you have to make. Is it enough to rip it out and try again and keep fiddling with it? And I have found sometimes you just can't get them to line up perfectly. But on something like this, it's Halloween, things are rickety, rackety. I'm just going to call it a customization. But as I said, it is not out enough for you to be really that concerned about because the overall effect is great. Now, I did press it to get it flat. It is fairly thick. Those seams are fairly thick. That's why we pressed them open. I did use acorn pressing solution. That helped a great deal to get them flat, but they are not perfectly flat. Now at this point in the instructions that came with this, they do a border by cutting 2.5-inch strips of whatever color you want and basically building your border the way you would on a quilt. However, they do suggest that you actually cut strips of batting 2.5 inches, slightly under 2.5 inches, about 2.25 inches. And as you sew the borders on, you sew that batting on as well. And the whole idea here is that you have borders that have batting the same, pretty much the same thickness as what's in each of the tiles. I don't do it that way. That's too much bother. What I do is I will just cut my strips, and I have my strips cut right here, and I will put the borders on just as you would like a quilt. But then afterwards, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sandwich this like I would with a quilt. I'm going to have backing fabric, I'm going to have more battleizer, and the top. And once it's all sandwiched together and I do a little stitch in the ditch along the horizontal and vertical lines of this quilt, that'll hold it all together. It won't, everything will have the right amount of batting in it. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to attach the borders, and I'll show you what it looks like when the borders are attached, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about finishing it up by sandwiching it and getting all your layers sewn together. Okay, so the borders are on right now, and that means what I have to do next is make my sandwich, pick out some backing fabric, cut some battleizer, because that's what I used in it. Battleizer, as you know, is a low loft, a little denser kind of batting that's great for placemats, table runners, or wall hangings. Anything you want to lay flat. And get those pieces together and then bind it. But a little tip here. Occasionally, you will have a seam line show up, like where the thread is, because it didn't get absolutely into the seam allowance when you put parts together, or in this case, it was up near the top where the borders are, and there was a white line, a white stitch line, just ever so slight. And what I did was I took a fabric marker, a purple fabric marker, and just blended it into the fabrics that were also there. And there was another spot where I used a blue marker, blue fabric. And those are permanent, not that you're going to wash this, but just add a little of that on very carefully, just a small amount, and hit it with your iron just to heat set it, and it disappears. So you don't need to worry about that kind of thing. If that's something there is bothering you, just use a fabric marker and color it in. Okay, so I put the borders on, I put a backing on, I layered it, and I've sewn it up and stitched in the ditch, and it's all done. And here it is. I had a few minor problems with it, but for the most part, it turned out not too bad. One of my borders is a little crooked looking because I did something I said you shouldn't do. I hit that part accidentally with steam, and the no-show mesh shrunk and it puckered it in. And I tried to compensate with that as best I could, but there's no repairing it. There's no way you could fix it at all. So beware of that. Don't use no-show mesh. Use a tearaway stabilizer in these. And after all, tearaway stabilizer will be fine because you're probably not going to ever wash a wall hanging. So yeah, live and learn. But anyways, it's done and it looks okay. But as I said, I could have done a better job if I had been a little bit more careful with it. But anyways, that's how you put one of these things together.